Have you ever wondered why something as natural as sex holds such incredible power over the human mind? Why it can build connections, destroy relationships, influence choices, and even shape who we think we are? Today, let's dive into the fascinating world of psychological facts about sex and human behavior. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll never look at it the same way again. You see, sex isn't just a physical act. It's a mirror that reflects the human psyche. It tells us how we love, how we attach, how we deal with pleasure, and how we understand ourselves. Psychology has spent decades studying it, and every discovery reveals something striking about the way our minds and bodies are connected. Let's start with attraction. People often say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but psychology says beauty is also in the brain of the beholder. When we see someone we find attractive, the brain releases dopamine, the same chemical that spikes when we win a jackpot or eat our favorite food. That rush you feel when you meet someone and your heart skips a beat? That's dopamine and norepinephrine teaming up to make you feel alive. The interesting part is that your brain can get addicted to that feeling. That's why new love feels so intoxicating. It's literally a high. But there's more. Studies show that physical attraction is only one layer. What really sustains desire is emotional connection. People who feel emotionally safe with their partners tend to enjoy intimacy more. The brain links trust with pleasure. When you trust someone, your body releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It's the same chemical released when a mother holds her baby. It deepens attachment and makes the experience more meaningful. So, it's not just about the act, it's about the connection behind it. Here's another fascinating fact. When people are sexually attracted to someone, they unconsciously mimic their body language. They lean in, match breathing rhythms, even mirror facial expressions. It's called limbic synchronization, a nonverbal way of saying, I'm in tune with you, shit. That's why chemistry isn't just an idea, it's a real neurological process. Now, let's talk about what sex does to your perception of others. When someone experiences intimacy, their brain releases a flood of oxytocin and vasopressin, which enhance feelings of attachment. That's why casual encounters often become more complicated than people expect. The body doesn't always separate emotion from experience. The mind often interprets physical closeness as emotional closeness. It's nature's way of promoting bonding, whether we plan for it or not. Here's something that surprises many people. Men and women experience sexual desire differently, but not in the way most people assume. While men are often perceived as being more visually stimulated, psychology shows that women's desire tends to be more contextual. A woman's mind can be turned on by emotional cues, security, and the feeling of being desired, while a man's response is often triggered by visual or physical factors. Both are deeply psychological. They just run on different scripts. Another fact that might make you pause is that sexual fantasies aren't always about what people want in real life. They're often about control, curiosity, or exploring emotions that are hard to express. The brain uses fantasy as a safe space to experiment. What you imagine doesn't necessarily reflect your moral values. It reflects your emotional landscape. It's how the subconscious plays with the idea of power, vulnerability, and freedom. That's why psychologists say fantasy is one of the purest expressions of the human mind, not of the body. And let's be honest, society has always tried to control how we think about sex. Shame, guilt, and silence have shaped generations. Yet, psychology keeps reminding us that healthy sexual expression is part of a balanced life. Repressed desire doesn't vanish, it transforms into anxiety, frustration, or even aggression. On the other hand, people who have a positive and open attitude towards sexuality often report higher levels of happiness and confidence. Because when you understand your desires, now, let's explore something even deeper: how sex influences behavior outside the bedroom. Research shows that people who are sexually satisfied tend to be more empathetic, more cooperative, and even more creative. It's not just about pleasure, it's about energy. Sexual fulfillment releases tension, calms the nervous system, and boosts the sense of well-being. It literally rewires the brain toward positivity. On the flip side, sexual frustration can show up in subtle ways: irritability, low self-esteem, or even a lack of motivation. This isn't to say that everyone must be sexually active to be happy, but rather that the mind and body are constantly in dialogue. Ignoring one affects the other. One of the most interesting psychological findings about sex is how memory plays a role. The brain is wired to remember emotionally charged experiences more vividly than neutral ones. That means sexual encounters often leave deeper imprints. Not just physically, but emotionally. That's why people sometimes struggle to move on after an intimate relationship ends. It's not weakness, it's neuroscience. The brain is trying to make sense of a bond that was once chemical, emotional, and physical all at once. Another point worth noting is how confidence affects sexual perception. People who feel good about themselves are often perceived as more attractive, regardless of physical appearance. Confidence activates a kind of psychological magnetism. It signals health, security, and presence. This explains why some people who may not fit conventional beauty standards still draw attention effortlessly. Attraction starts in the mind before it ever reaches the body. And then there's the psychology of touch. Touch is one of the oldest forms of communication, yet one of the most underestimated. The human brain reacts to affectionate touch as reassurance. A gentle touch can reduce cortisol, the stress hormone, almost instantly. It tells the nervous system, you're safe. We are. That's why intimacy has healing qualities, not just emotionally, but biologically. But perhaps the most profound truth about sex and human behavior is this: it reveals what we seek most: connection, validation, acceptance, and sometimes escape. It's the language the body uses when words fall short. Every desire tells a story. Some stories are about love, others are about loneliness, but all are deeply human. It's easy to think of sex as something separate from our psychology, but in truth, it's one of its purest expressions. It's how the mind and body meet in honesty. When you strip away the layers of taboo and judgment, what remains is a simple truth. Understanding sexuality is understanding humanity. When you study the psychology of sex, you're really studying emotion, communication, vulnerability, and the desire to be seen. And isn't that what we all want at the end of the day? To be seen, to be known, and to be loved, not just for what we show, but for who we are underneath it all, of course. Here's a natural continuation of the same speech, maintaining the tone, rhythm, and depth, written in that grounded, expressive Jessica Oper Sapporo style, and expanding it by about 1,000 more words. Something incredibly intriguing about how the human brain connects desire to identity. For some people, their sense of self-worth is tied to how desirable they feel. It's not vanity. It's psychology. The mind interprets desire as validation. When someone shows interest in us, our brain reads it as proof of value. That's why a compliment can linger, why attraction feels empowering, and why rejection can sting so deeply. The same circuits in the brain that register physical pain also activate during emotional rejection. So when someone breaks your heart, it's not all in your head. Your brain genuinely hurts. Sex and attraction, in that sense, aren't just about biology. They're about identity and belonging. People want to be wanted. It reassures us that we matter, that we're seen. It's one of the oldest psychological needs in the world. And yet, that very need can sometimes make us vulnerable. It can make us chase validation instead of connection. The more we tie our worth to being desired, the more fragile that worth becomes. Because the truth is, desire fades, but self-acceptance lasts. Now, let's talk about what happens in the mind after sex. There's something called the asexual afterglow, a period of up to 48 hours where couples feel more emotionally connected and satisfied. It's the body's way of strengthening bonds through hormones like oxytocin and prolactin. During this time, partners often communicate better, express more affection, and even resolve conflicts more easily. But here's the twist. That same process can create emotional confusion in casual relationships. Because the brain doesn't distinguish between emotional and physical intimacy as clearly as people think. To the brain, closeness is closeness. That's why some people find themselves catching feelings they didn't plan for. The chemistry was doing what it was designed to do. Another fascinating thing psychology teaches us is how early experiences shape adult intimacy. People who grow up in environments where affection was scarce or conditional often develop what's known as avoidant or anxious attachment styles. They might crave love but fear it at the same time. Sex for them can become a form of reassurance, a way to feel accepted, if only for a moment. On the other hand, people who felt emotionally secure growing up are often more comfortable with intimacy because their brains associate closeness with safety, not danger. This is why sexual behavior can't be judged simply by appearance or choice. Behind every pattern is a story. For some, sex is expression. For others, it's escape. For many, it's connection. But for everyone, it's communication, a form of emotional language written in physical form. And speaking of communication, let's talk about one of the most overlooked truths. How people talk about sex reveals how they think about themselves. Those who approach it with openness and curiosity often have healthier relationships, not just with others, but with their own bodies. They see pleasure as a shared experience, not a performance. But those who associate it with shame or secrecy often carry internalized messages from upbringing, culture, or religion. They may suppress desire to appear proper, but suppression never erases need. It only buries it deeper until it shows up in other ways, sometimes as resentment, sometimes as confusion, sometimes as silence. Psychology shows that sexual communication, the ability to express what feels good, what one needs, is one of the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction. Yet it's one of the hardest things for people to talk about. Why? Because sex is tied to vulnerability. Saying what you want means admitting what you feel. And that can be terrifying. It exposes the parts of us we often keep hidden. Our insecurities, our curiosities, our fears of rejection. There's also the psychology of expectation. Society feeds us endless images of what sex is supposed to look like. Effortless, passionate, perfect. But real human intimacy is far from cinematic. It's messy, unpredictable, emotional, sometimes awkward, often imperfect. And yet, that imperfection is what makes it real. The healthiest people are those who can laugh in those moments, who see intimacy not as performance, but as connection. When people drop the act and simply show up as they are, that's when genuine closeness begins. When you feel neglected or unseen, your body reacts too. It's all one system. The way you think, feel, and love affects how you connect. And the way you connect reflects how you see yourself. Sex, in its truest form, is an exchange of energy. It's communication without words. It's vulnerability made visible. And when handled with awareness, it becomes more than pleasure. It becomes understanding. The understanding of another person, yes, but also the understanding of oneself. Because in that space of honesty and openness, we confront our fears, our longings, and our truth. And maybe that's what makes it so powerful. It's not just about attraction or desire. It's about the courage to be real. The courage to let someone in, to be seen without the armor, to express who you are without apology. Because that's where connection lives, not in perfection, but in presence. There's another side to human sexuality that lives quietly in the background, the emotional and psychological meanings we attach to it without even realizing it. For some, intimacy is a language of reassurance, a way to ask silently, am I loved? Am I enough? Am I enough? For others, it's a form of power, a way to feel in control of their world when other parts of life feel uncertain. Psychology has long observed that people project their emotional struggles into their intimate lives, often without awareness. Someone who feels powerless might become controlling in relationships. Someone who feels unseen might chase intensity just to feel noticed. Every behavior has a root, and sex often becomes the stage where those hidden emotions perform. The most striking part is that this connection between emotion and behavior begins far earlier than most people realize. Children absorb unspoken messages about affection, touch, and boundaries long before they ever understand what intimacy is. They learn whether love feels safe or conditional, whether attention feels nurturing or demanding. Those early patterns quietly write the emotional scripts that adults later act out. When psychologists talk about healing intimacy issues, they're often really talking about rewriting those invisible scripts, teaching the mind that closeness doesn't have to mean danger, and that love doesn't always have to come with pain. The human brain also links sexual desire with imagination. It's not simply a biological response, but a creative one. When people are drawn to someone, their minds begin to construct stories. What it would feel like to be close, how they might connect, what that connection could mean. The fantasy isn't only about the act, it's about the emotion and identity that come with it. That's why desire can exist even without physical contact. The brain is constantly creating, projecting, and interpreting meaning. What's fascinating is how quickly the brain can shift from logic to emotion in these moments. Someone can spend days rationalizing what they want, but one glance, one scent, one tone of voice can override logic completely. That's the limbic system at work, the emotional center of the brain that governs instinct and desire. It moves faster than thought, faster than reason. It's the part of the mind that reminds us we're still, at our core, animals with emotions layered over instinct. Understanding that isn't an excuse for impulsive behavior. It's a reminder that self-awareness matters. When people learn to observe their emotions instead of being ruled by them, they begin to understand themselves on a deeper level. Another interesting truth is how vulnerability can be more intimidating than desire. Many people can handle attraction, but few can handle being seen. Sex often becomes a safer space to express what words cannot. Anger, affection, curiosity, or even apology. It's a place where masks fall away, but also where fears emerge. The fear of not being good enough, the fear of being judged, the fear of being known too deeply. When you know your emotional landscape, you stop expecting others to fill your voids. You approach intimacy as a complement to your wholeness, not a cure for your emptiness. That's the difference between connection and dependency. In that sense, understanding sex is really about understanding self-worth. It's about knowing that your value doesn't rise or fall based on who desires you. It's about recognizing that pleasure and respect must coexist. And it's about learning that real attraction isn't about appearance. It's about energy, presence, and emotional honesty. The most magnetic people are those who carry peace within themselves. They don't chase. They attract naturally because they know who they are. At the core of it all, the psychology of sex is a study of emotion, identity, and truth. It's not just about what people do. It's about why they do it, what they feel, and what they seek through it. Every attraction, every connection, every heartbreak is part of the same human story. The search for closeness, for meaning, for reflection in another's eyes. And while the paths people take differ, the desire underneath them all is the same. To be understood, to be accepted, and to be loved without pretense. What's also remarkable about human sexuality is how fluid and adaptable it can be. People like to think of desire as something fixed, but psychology shows that it changes constantly, responding to experiences, emotions, and context. What attracts you at one point in life might not attract you later. The mind keeps rewriting its preferences based on growth, heartbreak, and exposure. Sometimes that change happens subtly as you learn more about yourself and what truly fulfills you. Other times, it's sudden, a realization that what once felt thrilling now feels empty. empty. These shifts are not signs of confusion, but signs of evolution. Desire grows with self-awareness. There's a reason why people talk about chemistry like it's magic. It feels spontaneous, but it's actually the result of an intricate psychological dance. When two people meet, their bodies exchange subtle cues, tone of voice, scent, posture, micro-expressions that the mind processes in milliseconds. If those cues align with the brain's internal template of attraction, sparks fly. That template isn't universal. It's shaped by past experiences and emotional memory. Sometimes we're drawn to people who remind us of warmth and safety. Other times we're drawn to those who mirror unresolved tension. Either way, the body senses familiarity before the mind can name it. Interestingly, emotional intelligence plays a huge role in how people experience intimacy. Those who can read emotions, their own and others, tend to connect more deeply and meaningfully. They understand the small, invisible threads that hold connection together. They sense when their partner needs comfort rather than passion, when silence means reflection rather than rejection. Emotional intelligence turns intimacy into dialogue, not transaction. It's not about getting something from someone. It's about building something with them. Sex and love, though often linked, are separate but overlapping systems. Love is about attachment. Sex is about desire. One seeks stability, the other seeks novelty. Psychology calls this the paradox of romantic relationships. People crave both security and excitement, comfort and adventure. Excitement, comfort, and adventure. Balancing these two forces is what makes long-term relationships so complex and fascinating. Those who manage to keep both alive understand that love requires intention. You have to nurture familiarity without letting it become monotony. You have to create new experiences while maintaining emotional safety. It's not luck, it's effort guided by awareness. It's also important to understand that attraction isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's about the parts of ourselves they awaken. When someone captivates you, they might be reflecting a version of you that you haven't fully expressed yet. Maybe they embody confidence you wish you had, or freedom you crave, or gentleness you've forgotten. The mind doesn't always desire people. It desires the emotions and experiences they represent. That's why attraction can feel mysterious. It's your subconscious reaching toward growth. In some ways, intimacy is one of the greatest teachers of self-awareness. It reveals your triggers, your patterns, and your limits. It shows you where you struggle to let go, where you crave control, and where you fear rejection. Every relationship, even the painful ones, teaches you something about your emotional blueprint. When you look back, you start to see how each experience shaped your understanding of connection. The ones that hurt often hold the most powerful lessons. They force you to confront the parts of yourself that need healing. Psychologists often say that sex isn't just about pleasure, it's about meaning. The context matters as much as the act. When intimacy happens in an environment of trust, it strengthens self-esteem and emotional well-being. When it happens in confusion or disconnection, it can leave people feeling hollow. That's because the brain interprets intimacy as communication. If the emotional message behind it is unclear, the mind struggles to process it. It's not just about bodies meeting, it's about stories intertwining. Every encounter carries emotion, and every emotion tells a story. The relationship between love and power is another fascinating psychological dynamic. In every intimate connection, there's an unspoken negotiation of power. Who initiates, who yields, who leads, who follows. It's not always about dominance. Sometimes it's about trust. Surrendering control, even for a moment, requires safety. Taking the lead requires responsibility. When both people understand that balance, the connection deepens. But when power becomes manipulation, the relationship turns toxic. True intimacy can only exist where there is equality of respect, even if the roles shift from moment to moment. One of the quietest but most powerful aspects of sexuality is touch. Touch communicates things words can't. It says, I see you, I'm here, we're safe. The absence of touch can be just as loud. People underestimate how deeply the human nervous system depends on gentle, caring contact. A simple hand on the back or a brush of skin can regulate the heartbeat, lower anxiety, and release oxytocin. Touch is our oldest form of comfort, our first language before words. When given with intention, it heals. Something that surprises many people is how differently individuals process guilt and pleasure. Some grow up in environments that equate desire with shame. They learn to suppress it, and that suppression can lead to emotional detachment. Others grow up in permissive settings where they seek intensity but struggle with emotional depth. In both cases, the challenge is the same: learning balance. Sexual health, like mental health, depends on integration, the ability to hold desire and respect together, pleasure and purpose together. And then there's fantasy, the private space where imagination explores what reality cannot. Fantasies aren't confessions. They're expressions. They're expressions. They allow people to experiment safely with power, freedom, curiosity, and emotion. They're less about the literal scenario and more about the feeling behind it. Sometimes they reveal hidden needs for control, sometimes hidden desires for surrender, and sometimes simply a need for play. When people learn to understand rather than judge their fantasies, they uncover valuable insight into their emotional worlds. One of the most liberating ideas in modern psychology is that sexuality doesn't have to fit a mold. Human beings exist on a spectrum of desires, orientations, and preferences. It allows us to see others not through the lens of morality or comparison, but through shared humanity. The most important lesson from all this is that sexuality, in its healthiest form, isn't about control or perfection. It's about authenticity. It's about the courage to be honest with yourself, to embrace your desires without shame, and to communicate them with respect. It's about learning that pleasure and emotional safety can coexist. That vulnerability is strength, and that real connection begins when people stop pretending. The psychology of sex teaches that every person's expression of intimacy is unique, shaped by their story, their scars, and their healing. So, understanding sex is really understanding life. It's learning how to merge mind and body, thought and feeling, reason and instinct. It's realizing that connection is both a science and an art, something you can study but never fully control. And maybe that's the beauty of it. It reminds us that no matter how advanced or logical we become, we're still human beings moved by emotion, drawn by connection, and wired for love. When people approach intimacy with awareness instead of fear, compassion instead of control, and honesty instead of judgment, they don't just experience sex, they experience understanding. And in that understanding lies the deepest kind of freedom, the freedom to be fully, unapologetically human.